The hamlet of Thornwall found its place within the valley, resembling a child overcome by fear. Its rustic thatched rooftops and fuming smokestacks appeared minute when set against the ancient woodland that enclosed it. On evenings when the moon was entirely visible and bloated, no resident dared to cross their threshold, because those were the times when Queen Cassia's carriage would drift through the vaporous air. Benio, a boy of 5 years, was positioned near the forge, observing his father beat bright metal into shape. The constant clanking rhythm had functioned as his sleep song since birth, the scent of scorching iron and coal being his perpetual companion. Unlike other youngsters who shuddered at the narratives of the vampire sovereign, Benio felt captivated. He had observed her once when her transportation traversed the village square, a brief sight of flaming hair and pale skin which lingered in his night visions. "Father, will the queen arrive this evening?" he inquired, his tiny fingers tracing patterns in the soot covering the work surface. Henrik the blacksmith lifted his gaze, his hardened features folding with anxiety. "The blood moon is ascending, but you must remain indoors, child. The queen's retinue brings nothing but demise, but she possesses great beauty." Benio whispered. His father's hammer descended with unexpected force. "Attractiveness is the devil's snare, son. The queen consumes beauty before she depletes it. Recall your mother." Benio lowered his head. He had never known his mother, only that she had passed away on the night of his birth when the queen's coach last passed through Thornwall. As darkness descended, the village became motionless. Doors were secured, windows sealed, prayers were quietly recited. But Benio slipped away while his father rested near the cooling forge. He carried a small keepsake, a simple iron rose he had secretly created during his father's absences, a childlike imitation of the metal decorations on the queen's conveyance. The stone road shone like silver under the moonlight. Benio stationed himself at the village boundary where the road curved around the ancient oak, marking the division between the mortal world and the untamed territories beyond. Then he weighted the iron rose tightly held in his small soot-stained hand. He sensed their approach before he saw them, a shiver of cold that moved through the air, causing the leaves to tremble. Then the sound, a soft, almost silent clip-clop of hooves that made no natural sound against the stone. From the mist, 4 pitch-black horses materialized, their eyes glowing like hot coals, vapor curling from their expanded nostrils. They pulled a coach of dark wood and silver, elaborate and terrifying, its windows draped with deep red velvet. Benio stood firm, his heart beating heavily against his ribs. The carriage reduced speed as it neared the horses, snorting as they detected human blood. A fair hand drew the curtain aside, and then she was there, Queen Cassia, the everlasting ruler of the night, whose beauty was like a blade through the spirit. Her hair tumbled in waves of vivid crimson, framing a face of such perfect balance it seemed sculpted from marble by divine hands. But it was her eyes that captured Benio's gaze, red like newly shed blood, ancient and knowledgeable. The queen's stare fell upon the small figure by the road, and curiosity flickered across her ageless features. She raised one graceful hand, and the carriage came to a halt. "What courageous little mortal dares to stand in my pathway?" Her voice was like sweetened liquid over frozen water, pleasant and chilling simultaneously. Benio swallowed hard. "I am Benio, son of Henrik the blacksmith, your majesty." He stepped forward, offering the iron rose with shaking fingers. "I fashioned this for you." A complete hush descended upon the night. The queen's guards, pale beings with predatory eyes, shifted nervously, but Cassia raised a hand to quiet them. She leaned closer, the aroma of aged roses and copper enveloping her. "A blacksmith's boy," she pondered, taking the unrefined rose between 2 thin fingers. "Are you not afraid of me, child? Do you not understand what I am?" "You are the queen," Benio stated simply, "and the most beautiful lady in the entire world." A smile touched the edges of Cassia's crimson lips, hinting at the slightest presence of fangs. "Beauty is temporary, little one. Even mine has its cost." She examined the iron rose. "What compensation do you request for this present?" Benio's eyes gleamed with innocent resolve. "When I grow up I will be your husband," he declared. For a moment stillness reigned, then Cassia laughed, the sound like silver chimes in the night, echoing through the trees and causing shivers down the backs of villagers concealed behind their doors. "Oh, little one," she said, amusement dancing in her blood-red eyes, "the world will consume you long before it ever touches my heart." She placed the iron rose into her bodice, near where a heart ought to beat. "But I shall keep your gift, for it entertains me." As the carriage began to move once more, Cassia's gaze lingered on the boy. "Live well, Benio of Thornwall, become strong, dream your mortal aspirations. By the time you are a man I shall have forgotten your face." But as the mist consumed her carriage and the sound of hooves receded into the night, Benio stood determined. "I will not forget yours, my queen," he whispered, "and I will return." Unbeknownst to the boy, as the carriage vanished into the darkness, Queen Cassia held the iron rose between her pale fingers once more, a peculiar expression crossing her timeless face. For a brief second something stirred within her, a memory of being human, long buried beneath ages of blood and shadow. "Such an unusual child," she muttered to herself. "It is a pity mortals perish so quickly." In the distance wolves began to cry out, announcing the hunt that would follow the queen's journey. But for the First time in centuries Cassia commanded her guards to spare the village that night, a small kindness perhaps, or merely the sudden impulse of an immortal queen affected by a mortal's simple dedication. 15 years passed much like shadows crossing the lunar surface. Thornwall changed very little, but Benio matured from a soot-stained child into a young man whose hands could shape metal according to his will, just as his father had before him. Henrik had died during a harsh winter 3 years ago, leaving Benio alone with the forge and the memories that haunted its stone walls. The visits of Queen Cassia's carriage had become less frequent over the years, but the stories of her kingdom spread like fire across the region. Tales spoke of her castle situated in the Carpathian peaks where living-eyed gargoyles watched from every tower. Whispers detailed grand halls where blood flowed like wine and courtiers who had not breathed in centuries danced until daybreak. Most frightening were the accounts of her throne room where the floors were supposedly stained with the essence of 1,000 enemies, and mirrors were forbidden lest they reveal the void where her reflection should be. Benio absorbed these stories like metal absorbs heat, his childhood interest solidifying into something deeper, an obsession refined by time. You still dream about her, don't you, old Magda asked one evening as Benio delivered new hinges for her door. The elderly woman was the village seer, her eyes cloudy with film but seeing much more than most. Benio simply nodded, knowing denial was useless. The Nosferatu are not meant to be loved, boy, she warned, her knotted fingers tracing ancient symbols in the air between them. Their embrace brings only darkness, their affection is possession, their eternity is damnation. I made her a promise, Benio responded simply. Magda spat on the ground, a youthful mistake. She has consumed the lifeblood of rulers and emperors. What could a blacksmith offer the sovereign of night? That question troubled Benio as he worked late into the evening, his hammer striking a blade unlike any he had forged previously. For years he had been perfecting his skill, studying with every master smith who passed through the area, but this sword was unique, its metal a strange combination of silver and steel, its handle covered in leather tan from a bull sacrificed under the full moon as Magda had instructed, a weapon to cleave through shadow itself. The old woman had whispered, pressing a small bottle of clear liquid into his hand. Treat it with holy water, anoint it with garlic oil, and no creature of the night will stand against it. Yet Benio had no desire to kill vampires. His goals ran deeper toward a fate he scarcely understood himself. A disturbance in the village square pulled him from his thoughts. Dropping his implements, he stepped outside to see riders in black armor charging through the village. Their tunics bore the crimson sign of Queen Cassia, a rose leaking blood here. The declaration of her eternal majesty called the lead rider, whose pale face and two sharp teeth marked him as one of the queen's thralls, humans who served vampires in the hope of one day receiving the dark gift themselves. The dragon Valix has awakened in the Black Peak Mountains, its flames endanger the realm. The queen offers her favor to any who can slay the beast, the villagers muttered fearfully. Dragons were uncommon but deadly creatures of ancient magic whose blood and breath could incinerate stone. Few who confronted them returned. As the riders departed, Benio returned to his forge with a new sense of purpose. By dawn the unusual sword was finished, a weapon of perfect equilibrium, its edge shimmering with unnatural sharpness. He named it Promesa, meaning promise. 3 days later he stood at the edge of Thornwall, a bag slung over his shoulder, Promesa sheathed at his hip. Old Magda waited on the road, a bundle of herbs and charms in her shriveled hands. Wear this at your throat, she said, pressing a small pouch containing wolfsbane and vervain into his palm. It will conceal your scent from the dampers and vacolazzi that hunt in the shade of her castle. Thank you, Magda. The old woman's cloudy eyes suddenly cleared, focusing on him with eerie intensity. You go not to kill the dragon but to claim the queen. It was not a query. Benio nodded. Once I made a promise, then heed my final caution, Magda whispered. The Strigoi queen has walked this earth for 7 centuries. She has outlasted empires. Her heart, if it still beats at all, is colder than winter ice. To love her is to lose your soul. Perhaps, Benio responded, or perhaps she has forgotten what it means to be loved. With those words he turned toward the mountain path that would lead him to the dragon's lair and beyond it to the dark spires of Cassia's domain. The journey was challenging. Benio traveled through woods where shadows moved independently of their sources and past villages where doors were marked with ancient symbols of protection. Twice he encountered the queen's hunting groups, pale nobles on midnight horses, their eyes gleaming hungrily in the darkness. Each time he hid the pouch at his throat, keeping him from their notice. On the 7th night, he reached the foothills of the Black Peak Mountains. The air smelled of sulfur and ash, and the ground beneath his feet was warm to the touch as he made camp in the shelter of a stone jutting. A voice spoke from the shadows, another hero seeking glory. The figure that emerged was tall and thin, dressed in tattered fine clothing that had once been magnificent. His eyes reflected the firelight like a cat's, and when he smiled his teeth were stained dark, or perhaps a fool seeking death. Benio's hand moved to Promesa's hilt. Who asks? Lazarus. The stranger replied with a mocking bow. Once court magician to her majesty, now let us say I serve in a different capacity. He circled the fire, moving with unnatural elegance. The dragon has already devoured 7 knights. What makes you think you'll fare better? Blacksmith. Benio stiffened. How do you know what I am? Lazarus laughed, a sound like dry leaves scraping stone, the soot ingrained in your fingernails, the way you examine my blade with a craftsman's eye. And he sniffed the air, the smell of iron that clings to you despite the herbs you. Where with sudden speed Lazarus was beside him, nostrils flaring, curious. You smell of mortal blood, yet something else pulses beneath your skin, something familiar. His eyes narrowed. You seek not just the dragon but the queen herself. Benio drew Promesa in one smooth action, its blade catching the firelight with an eerie luminescence. My business is my own. Lazarus hissed at the sight of the blade, pulling back slightly. Silver and steel, blessed and cursed in equal measure, a vampire hunter's weapon. His expression shifted from fear to amusement. Yet your heart beats not with hatred but with oh how delightful love. Before Benio could reply, Lazarus backed away, dissolving into the shadows. I shall observe your fate with interest, blacksmith. Few stories entertain my queen these days, perhaps yours will provide her some momentary distraction before the dragon claims you. His disembodied voice lingered in the darkness. The beast's lair is within the volcanic crater at the mountain's peak. Reach it by dawn if you wish to find him lethargic, and should you somehow survive, tell her majesty that Lazarus sends his eternal devotion. As silence returned to the night, Benio stared into the flames, wondering if he had just encountered a friend or a foe. Either way, his path was clear. Tomorrow he would face the dragon, the initial trial in his quest to fulfill a promise made by a child to a queen who had likely forgotten his existence. But Benio had not forgotten. The memory of ruby eyes and midnight laughter had sustained him through 15 years of preparation. Tomorrow would prove whether that preparation had been sufficient. Dawn broke over the Black Peak Mountains, painting the volcanic slopes in shades of blood and gold. Benio had started his climb hours before first light, following a dangerous route that twisted through razor-sharp stones and fields of black glass. The air grew thinner and hotter as he ascended, sulphurous vapors burning his lungs with each difficult breath. The mountain itself seemed alive, trembling occasionally beneath his feet, not with tremors Benio realized, but with the deep rumbling inhalations of the creature that slept within its core. By mid-morning he stood at the edge of the crater below. A vast cavern opened into the mountain's heart, where molten lava bubbled in pools of liquid fire. Spanning one such pool like a living bridge lay Valix, the dragon whose awakening had terrified the realm. The beast was magnificent in its frightening glory. Nearly 60 feet from nose to tail tip, its scales glistened like polished copper, darkening to black glass along its spine. Great leathery wings lay folded against its sides, occasionally twitching as it dreamed draconic dreams. Steam rose from its nostrils with each exhalation, and the heat of its body had turned the surrounding stone bright red. Benio crouched behind a boulder, studying the sleeping giant. Dragons were creatures of ancient magic, born when the world was young. Their blood was said to grant extraordinary powers to those brave or foolish enough to bathe in it. Their hearts, if consumed, could extend a mortal's life by centuries. Their scales could deflect the strongest blades, but they were not immortal. They could be killed if one knew the secret. Old Magda's voice echoed in his memory. A dragon's skin is impenetrable except at 4 spots: the eyes, the throat, the joint where wing meets shoulder, and the soft underbelly where the scales are thinnest. Benio unsheathed Promesa, its enchanted blade seeming to drink in the crimson light that saturated the cavern. The sword faintly vibrated, resonating with the ancient magic that surrounded it. This close to the dragon, he could sense the power emanating from the creature, a primitive energy that made his skin tingle and his blood sing. Moving silently despite his size, Benio descended into the cavern, using natural ledges as steps to approach the slumbering beast. Heat struck his face, sweat pouring from his brow, but he pressed on. 20 feet from the dragon he paused, judging the distance to the creature's throat. One perfect blow, that was all the chance he would get. He tensed, ready to leap forward, when the dragon's eye snapped open, an eye of molten gold with a vertical pupil that contracted sharply as it focused on the intruder. Mortal, Valix, rumbled its voice like stones grinding against each other. You trespass where even the undead fear to venture. The dragon's huge head rose, smoke curling from between teeth the size of daggers. It examined Benio with ancient shrewdness. You are not like the others, it observed, not a knight filled with vainglory, nor a thrall desperate for favor. The dragon inhaled deeply, its chest expanding. You smell of iron and ambition, and something else, something familiar. Benio stood his ground, Promesa held ready. I've come to end your threat to these lands. Valix laughed, a sound like an avalanche that shook loose stones from the cavern ceiling. These lands, child, these mountains were mine when her kind still cowered from the sun. The Queen of Night is merely the latest to claim control over what has always belonged to me. The dragon uncoiled its massive body, rising to its full height. Magma dripped from its scales, sizzling where it hit the stone. But you have not come solely for me, Valix continued, circling Benio with predatory grace. Your heart beats for her, the blood drinker who has sent so many to their deaths in this pit. My reasons are my own, Benio replied, tracking the dragon's movements, waiting for the moment to strike. So they are. The dragon's eyes narrowed. Perhaps we might reach an understanding, mortal. I have no disagreement with your kind. It is the Strigoi who invade my territory, building their castles of bone and shadow on my mountainside. What are you suggesting? Return to your queen. Tell her I have retreated deeper into the earth, that I will trouble her lands no more. In exchange she will remove her hunting parties from my mountains. Valix's voice dropped to a seductive murmur. You need not die here today. Benio hesitated. If the dragon spoke truthfully, he could return to Cassia's castle as the diplomat who had secured peace, not the warrior who had slain her enemy. Yet something in the dragon's too relaxed posture warned him, and if I refuse? Valix's jaws split in a terrible grin. Then we shall see if that pretty sword is more than decoration. With terrifying swiftness the dragon lunged. Benio dove aside, his jaws clamped shut where he had stood moments before. He rolled across scorching stone, coming up beneath the creature's extended neck. With all his strength he thrust Promesa upward. The enchanted blade pierced scales that should have turned steel to splinters. Black blood hot as the surrounding magma gushed forth, splattering Benio's arms and chest. He twisted the sword, driving it deeper. Valix roared a sound of pain and fury that shook the entire mountain. Its head reared back, tearing the sword from Benio's grasp as it remained embedded in the dragon's throat. With a desperate leap, Benio caught hold of the hilt, his weight dragging the blade through flesh and sinew. The dragon thrashed, wings beating furiously, sending hurricane-force winds through the cavern. Benio clung to the sword, his hands burning as the creature's blood seared his flesh. With one final desperate effort, he twisted Promesa and sliced outward. The blade cut cleanly through the dragon's throat. More black blood poured out, coating Benio from head to toe. Valix collapsed, its massive body crashing into the lava pool, sending waves of molten rock splashing against the cavern walls. As life faded from the dragon's golden eyes, it fixed Benio with a final knowing stare. Foolish mortal, it gurgled through the ruin of its throat, you might have been wise, now you shall be cursed. The dragon's blood burned like liquid fire where it touched Benio's skin, seeping into his pores, flowing into the cuts and burns he had sustained in the battle. He tried to wipe it away, but it seemed to be absorbed into his very flesh. A strange feeling spread through his body, not pain but a cold fire that raced along his veins, reaching for his heart. He staggered back from the dragon's corpse, feeling the change taking hold. His vision sharpened, colors becoming more vivid, senses more intense. His muscles trembled with new strength. The burns on his skin were already healing, leaving behind patches of toughened skin that faintly gleamed in the cavern's crimson light. What's happening to me? He gasped, staring at his hands as the last of the dragon's blood disappeared beneath his skin. The blessing and curse of dragonkind. Came a voice from the shadows. Lazarus stepped into view, his eyes reflecting the molten glow of the lava pools. Their blood grants power beyond mortal abilities, but it demands a price. The vampire circled Benio, studying him with fascination. Strength, speed, longevity, perhaps even a measure of magic. But also he gestured to where a small shadow had detached itself from Benio's feet, writhing with a life of its own, a darkness that will grow within you, a hunger not unlike our own. Benio watched in horror as his shadow twisted into shapes that mimicked his form but were somehow wrong, too sharp, too animalistic. What have I become? He whispered. Lazarus smiled, revealing fangs that shone in the firelight. Something new, something in between, neither entirely mortal nor truly monstrous. He extended a pale hand. Come, the queen will be most interested in her champion's transformation. Benio retrieved Promesa from the dragon's corpse, wiping the black blood on a cloth that smoldered at its touch. The sword seemed changed as well, its blade now etched with patterns resembling scales, its edge gleaming with an inner fire. As he sheathed the weapon, he felt a strange connection between it and his altered body, as though the sword had become an extension of himself, bound by the dragon's blood. They had both absorbed. Lead on, he told Lazarus, his voice deeper and more resonant than before its time. The queen remembered her promise. Together they ascended from the dragon's lair, leaving behind the corpse of an ancient power and the final remnants of Benio's humanity. Ahead lay the castle of Queen Cassia, its spires visible through the volcanic haze, dark fingers reaching toward a sky that had begun to darken with unnatural speed. Night was falling. The time of the vampire approached, and Benio, no longer purely human, walked willingly toward the embrace of the immortal queen who had once laughed at a child's innocent vow. The journey from Dragon's Peak to Queen Cassia's castle took 3 days, though for Benio time had become a strange fluid phenomenon. He no longer needed rest as he once did. A few hours of stillness each night was sufficient to recover his strength. Food held little interest, though occasionally a strange hunger would plague him, one that made his shadow writhe and stretch toward living creatures that crossed their path. The dragon's essence, Lazarus explained as they walked a narrow mountain path, the castle drawing ever closer on the horizon. It seeks to consume, to control. You must master it or it will master you. Benio said nothing, but he felt the truth of it within him. Something ancient and terrible had awakened, a shadow self that whispered of power beyond imagination. If only he would surrender to its appeal. Each day the struggle to maintain control grew more difficult. The castle itself seemed to emerge directly from the mountainside, its black stone towers merging seamlessly with the jagged peaks. No mortar joined the massive blocks. Legend said they had been fused by dragonfire centuries ago when Cassia had first claimed this realm. Gargoyles perched on every support and corner, their stone eyes following visitors with malevolent awareness. Some, Benio realized with a chill, were not statues at all but living creatures bound in service to the vampire queen. As they approached the massive iron entrance, Lazarus placed a restraining hand on Benio's arm. A word of caution, blacksmith, He murmured, the court of Queen Cassia is a nest of vipers, some have served her for centuries, others constantly plot for her favor or her throne. Trust no one, not even you, Benio asked with a cynical smile. The vampire's lips twitched. Especially not me, I serve my own interests first. Always. His expression grew serious, but I admit to curiosity about your destiny. Few mortals have ever walked willingly into the queen's domain with a goal other than submission. Before Benio could respond, the gates swung open with a groan of ancient hinges. 6 guards appeared, not the human thralls Benio had expected, but true Nosferatu, their pale faces beautiful and terrible in the fading light. They wore armor of black and silver, and their eyes gleamed with the eerie light of the undead. Lazarus hissed the captain, a female vampire whose hair was bound in intricate braids studded with bone fragments. You return unexpectedly and with company. Her nostrils flared as she caught Benio's scent. What manner of creature is this? Not human, not vampire, not. Her eyes widened. Dragon touched. Impossible. Nothing is impossible, Lilith. Lazarus replied smoothly, as this man has proven by slaying Valak single-handedly. A murmur ran through the guards. Lilith studied Benio with newfound caution. The queen must be informed immediately. Indeed, said Lazarus, I believe she will find this development most intriguing. They were escorted through the outer courtyard where more of the queen's servants went about their tasks, some human, their necks bearing the twin puncture marks of vampire feeding, others clearly supernatural with elongated limbs or sharp features that marked them as creatures of the night. The inner fortress rose like a mountain of shadow, its windows glowing with eerie blue-white illumination. As they crossed the entrance, Benio felt a pressure against his mind, a subtle probing, as though the very stone sought to know his intentions. The castle's defenses, Lazarus whispered, ancient blood magic woven into its foundations. It recognizes threats to the queen. They passed through immense halls hung with tapestries depicting battles long forgotten by mortal history. Chandeliers made from human bones cast a ghostly light across floors inlaid with obsidian, and silver mirrors lined some corridors, but they showed only empty passages, no reflection of the vampires who walked these halls. Benio, however, cast a reflection, though not one. He recognized the face that looked back at him from the polished silver was harsher, more angular than he remembered. His eyes, once clear blue, now held flecks of gold that caught the light like a predator's, and behind him his shadow moved independently, stretching and contracting with each step. Finally they reached a set of towering doors carved with scenes of the hunt, vampires pursuing mortals through moonlit forests, their faces masks of beautiful cruelty. 2 thralls in crimson uniforms stood guard, their eyes vacant, their postures rigid. The queen holds court. One droned, his voice flat and empty. She receives no visitors. Lazarus smiled thinly. Tell her the dragon slayer has come to claim his reward. The thrall's expression did not change, but he turned and disappeared through a small side door. Minutes later he returned. Her Majesty will see you. The mortal only. Lazarus raised an eyebrow at Benio. It seems you've piqued her interest after all. He bowed with exaggerated respect. Remember what I said about Viper's blacksmith, and remember this: the queen has not survived 7 centuries by being predictable. The massive doors swung open, revealing the throne room beyond. Benio stepped forward alone, Promesa reassuring weight at his side, the dragon's blood singing in his veins. The hall extended nearly 100 feet, its vaulted ceiling lost in shadow. Columns of black marble supported arches of delicate stonework, between which hung banners bearing the queen's crimson rose. At the far end, upon a raised platform of stepped levels, stood a throne carved from a single massive piece of bloodstone, its surface polished to a mirror sheen, and upon it sat Cassia. She was exactly as Benio remembered, yet entirely different. Her beauty was still a physical shock. Alabaster skin framed by hair like liquid flame, eyes the color of fresh blood, lips curved in a perpetual half-smile that promised both pleasure and pain. She wore a gown of midnight velvet that left her shoulders bare, revealing skin so pale it seemed to glow in the chamber's dim light. But where the boy had seen only beauty, the man saw the predator underneath, the ancient calculating intelligence in those crimson eyes, the subtle tension in her posture that spoke of a creature always ready to strike. Around her throat hung a necklace of black diamonds, each stone rumored to contain the soul of a lover who had failed to please her. The court filled the chamber's shadows, dozens of vampires in finery from 100 different eras, their ageless faces watching the newcomer with hunger and suspicion. Some were ancient, their skin like parchment stretched over bone. Others appeared newly turned, their beauty still carrying echoes of humanity. All were deadly. So Queen Cassia's voice carried effortlessly across the vast space. The dragon slayer comes before us. Her gaze traveled over Benio, lingering on the sword at his hip, the faint golden glow of his eyes, the shadow that moved unnaturally at his feet. You have changed since last we met, mortal. Benio knelt on one knee, head bowed in the formal gesture of respect. Your Majesty remembers me. A ripple of surprise passed through the court. The queen's expression remained carefully neutral, but something flickered in the depths of her eyes. Recognition perhaps, or merely curiosity. We have lived many centuries, she replied, faces blur like reflections in troubled water. She leaned forward slightly, studying him more intently. Yet there is something familiar about you. Rise and state your name and purpose. Benio stood, meeting her gaze directly, a boldness that caused several courtiers to hiss in disapproval. I am Benio of Thornwall, son of Henrik the blacksmith. I have slain the dragon Valak as proclaimed by your royal decree, and what reward do you seek for this service?" the queen asked, her voice deceptively soft. "Gold lands a title among mortals, or perhaps," her lips curved in a smile that did not reach her eyes, "you wish for the dark gift itself." "I seek none of these things, your majesty." Murmurs spread through the court. Queen Cassia's eyebrows rose fractionally. The closest to surprise her features would display what then? "Dragon Slayer, what brings a mortal willingly into my domain?" Bearing a sword that reeks of silver and holy water, his body transformed by dragon magic, Benio took a step forward, ignoring the guards who tensed at his movement. 15 years ago I stood by the roadside in Thornwall and gave you an iron rose. I made you a promise that night, a child's promise that you laughed at." His voice carried clearly through the hushed chamber. "I told you that when I grew up I would be your husband. I have come to fulfill that vow." The silence that followed was absolute. Then, like a gathering storm, whispers erupted throughout the court. Some vampires laughed outright, others watched with predatory intensity, sensing weakness or opportunity on her throne. Cassia remained perfectly still, her expression unreadable. When she finally spoke, her voice had dropped to a dangerous purr. "You presume much, Benio of Thornwall." She ascended from her throne in a single graceful movement, descending the steps with supernatural fluidity. The courtiers quickly moved aside as she advanced toward him. "Many individuals have attempted to lay claim to me over the ages, monarchs, emperors, powerful beings beyond human comprehension." She circled him slowly like a wolf assessing its quarry. "All of them have failed." She halted directly in front of him, close enough for him to inhale the scent of aged roses and copper that encircled her like an invisible field. "Why should I not drain the life from you where you stand for such blatant disrespect?" Benio maintained eye contact even as his shadow twisted anxiously at his feet. "Because you retained my rose, your majesty, because something within you recalled the boy who felt no fear for the briefest fraction of a second." Something flickered across Cassia's flawless features, an emotion too transient to identify. Then her expression became resolute once more. "Court is dissolved," she declared abruptly without looking away from Benio. "All of you depart now." The vampires hesitated, clearly unwilling to miss the unfolding drama. Cassia slightly turned her head, her eyes flashing dangerously. Immediately, within moments, the vast chamber was deserted, leaving Benio entirely alone with the vampire queen. In the sudden silence, he could distinctly hear the steady rhythm of his own beating heart and was acutely aware that it was the soul heart pulsating within the entire fortress. Cassia walked around Benio like a predator, her gown rustling against the stone floor. The emptiness of the throne room magnified every sound, her measured steps, his constant breathing, the faint vibration of Promesa and its scabbard reacting to the ancient magic saturating the air. "The rose," she finally stated, stopping before him once more, a simple object of iron misshapen by a child's inexperienced hands. From the layers of her gown she retrieved a small object that shone dully in the light of the torches. Benio caught his breath. The iron rose, unchanged after 15 years, preserved by whatever magic vampires possess to repel the damage of time. "You kept it," he whispered. "Sentimentality is a weakness I cannot afford," Cassia countered, turning the rose between her pale fingers. "Yet it remains here, a curiosity, a reminder of human folly." Her crimson eyes met his. "You were a child. Children make commitments without understanding their gravity." "I understood," Benio insisted, "not completely perhaps, but even then I knew my allegiance belonged to you." A cold smirk curved her lips. "Hearts are delicate things, easily shattered, easily silenced." She placed one slender hand against his chest, directly over the organ in question. "Yours now beats unusually. The dragon's blood has altered you." "Not in any significant way." Her fingers pressed harder, her inhuman strength was evident even in this casual gesture. "Everything is significant, blacksmith. The dragon's curse runs deeper than you realize. Even now it is reforming you from within." Her nostrils slightly flared. "I can perceive it, the magic bonding itself to your essence, consuming what you were to produce something new." She suddenly withdrew her hand. "You are no longer wholly human, yet not truly immortal, a hybrid creature caught between existences." Something resembling genuine curiosity sparked in her eyes. "How does it feel?" Benio considered the inquiry carefully. "Like standing at the brink of an abyss, knowing I could either plummet or learn to soar." "Poetic," she murmured, "but ultimately meaningless. The dragon's blood provides strength, yes, but it also corrupts. In time you will become a shadow of yourself, driven by desires you cannot currently fathom unless I find a grounding point." Benio said calmly, "Something to cling to as the darkness expands." Cassia laughed, the sound like silver bells in the vast room. "And you believe I could be that anchor, I who have traversed darkness for 7 centuries. She motioned to the empty throne room. "Observe, Dragon Slayer, this is my dominion, a realm of unending night inhabited by beings who feed on the living. There is no light here to dispel your shadows." "Perhaps," Benio conceded, "or perhaps you have existed in darkness for so long that you have forgotten what illumination feels like." Her expression hardened. "You speak of matters you cannot comprehend. Your existence is solitary," he interjected, "taking a great risk. 7 centuries of authority, of adoration and terror from your subjects. But when did someone last look upon you without fear or ambition in their gaze? When did someone last touch you not as a queen but as a woman?" For a moment fury contorted her features into something terrifying, a glimpse of the fiend beneath the beautiful exterior. The temperature in the room drastically dropped, frost forming on the stone floor around her feet. You have overstepped your bounds, she hissed, her voice infused with supernatural overtones that sent shivers down his spine. I could rip out your throat before your next heartbeat. I could confine you to my dungeons where you would serve as sustenance for ages. I could invert your mind until you believed yourself a canine crawling at my feet. Benio maintained his position though his shadow visibly quivered. You could, he agreed, but you will not. And why not? Because I am the first enigma you have encountered in centuries. The anger in her expression gave way to something more analytical. She moved toward a side table where a crystal decanter stood filled with dark liquid that Benio instinctively knew was not wine. She poured a measure into a goblet, the thick crimson fluid catching the light. An enigma, she repeated, taking a sip from the goblet. A fitting description. You should not exist. Benio of Thornwall, a mortal who defeats a dragon and survives its blood curse, a blacksmith who forges a blade capable of killing ancient beings. Her eyes narrowed. Who assisted you in creating that sword? It holds spells beyond human craft. Old Magda of Thornwall, she is knowledgeable in the ancient ways. Recognition flashed across Cassia's face. Magdalena the Wise, I believed her long deceased. A bitter smile played at her lips. She once sought to end my rule with fire and silver. Now she sends you with a sword and dragon blood. Her animosity toward my kind persists, it seems. She cautioned me against coming here. Benio admitted, said to love you would cost me my soul. She was not mistaken. Cassia placed her goblet down. Affection is a delusion humans create to give significance to their fleeting lives. It has no place in my existence. Benio took a step closer to her. Yet you preserved my rose all these years. Something vulnerable briefly surfaced in her eyes before disappearing behind cold disdain. A bauble, nothing more, as you shall be if you continue this absurdity. She turned away, pacing toward a tall window that overlooked the mountains. The night is advancing. I have indulged your fantasy long enough. Then why not simply execute me? Benio pressed, following her. Why dismiss your court? Why communicate with me at all? She did not turn. Perhaps I find you entertaining, a temporary diversion from eternity. Or perhaps, he said softly, closing the gap between them, something within you remembers what it was to be human, to desire more than authority and blood. Her shoulders tensed. Humanity is a frailty I abandoned centuries ago. Then why do you govern humans? Why surround yourself with their art, their music, their blood? He was close enough now to see the intricate needlework on her gown, the individual strands of fire-red hair that flowed down her back. You could exist in solitude, feeding only when necessary. Instead you have constructed a court, a kingdom, reflections of human civilization. She turned then, her face mere inches from his eyes blazing. You grasp nothing of what I am. Then demonstrate it to me, he challenged. If I am to be merely a bauble, a momentary distraction before you discard me, at least grant me understanding of what you truly are. For a long moment she scrutinized him, her expression unreadable. Then something shifted in her crimson eyes. A decision was reached. Very well, blacksmith, she said, her voice lowering to a whisper. You wish to know me, to understand the creature you so foolishly claim to love. I shall grant your desire. She raised one pale hand to his face, her touch cool against his skin, her nails subtly extended, sharp as razors, one tracing a thin line along his jaw. Blood oozed from the shallow cut, black tinged from the dragon's curse. Your blood now carries power, she murmured, her eyes fixed on the dark liquid dragon's essence, ancient magic. Her pupils dilated, hunger evident in her gaze. If I drink from you, I will know your mind, your memories, your soul. And you will know something of mine. Benio understood the peril inherent in her words. Vampire feeding was intimate, invasive, a fusion of consciousness as well as blood. She would perceive every thought, every vulnerability, every fear he possessed. And if I refuse? Her lips curved in a cold smile. Then leave my castle by dawn, return to your mortal life while you still can forget your childish promises and naive aspirations. Benio did not hesitate. He tilted his head, exposing the column of his throat. Take what you require. Surprise registered briefly in her eyes, followed by something darker. She leaned forward, her breath cool against his skin. Remember, blacksmith, you chose this. Her fangs punctured his flesh in a sudden burst of exquisite pain that rapidly transformed into something else entirely, a surge of sensation that sent lightning coursing through his veins. The world dissolved around him as her consciousness invaded his memories, flashing behind his eyes like fragments of a shattered mirror. A boy waiting by the roadside, an iron rose in his small hand, years of training pounding metal until his hands bled, determined to master his craft. The dragon's cavern, fire and blood, the curse seeping into his very bones. The journey to her castle driven by a promise made in childhood innocence. But then the flow reversed, and suddenly Benio was experiencing memories not his own, fragments of a life spanning centuries. A young woman in medieval clothing, fleeing through a forest as flames consumed her village behind her. The same woman, pale and beautiful, standing over the body of her first victim, horror and exhilaration warring in her expression, decades passing like leaves in the wind, loneliness stretching into centuries as she watched mortal lives flicker and fade around her, the burden of her crown heavier with each passing year as she struggled to maintain her realm against adversaries both mortal and immortal, and buried deep beneath it all a profound emptiness that nothing, not power, not blood, not worship had ever satisfied. With a gasp, Cassia violently pulled away. His blood stained her perfect lips. She stumbled backward, genuine shock piercing her careful composure. Impossible, she whispered, touching her mouth with trembling fingers. Your blood, the dragon's curse. It showed me the truth. Benio finished, pressing his hand to the wound on his neck. The pain was already fading, the dragon's magic healing his flesh. That I meant every word, that my promise wasn't a child's fantasy, but a vow I've spent 15 years preparing to fulfill. Cassia turned away, visibly struggling to regain her composure. When she spoke again, her voice had hardened once more. Dawn is approaching. You will be given chambers in the eastern tower. Rest, recover. She glanced over her shoulder, her expression carefully neutral. We shall converse again when night returns. Perhaps then we will ascertain your position in my court. It was not acceptance, but nor was it rejection. For the moment it sufficed, as guards appeared to escort him. From the throne room, Benio caught one last glimpse of the vampire queen standing alone by the window, the iron rose still clutched in her pale hand, her expression haunted by memories not entirely her own. The eastern tower rose like a black needle against the darkening sky. As Benio was led up its winding staircase, he felt the weariness of the past days washing over him. The encounter with Cassia had depleted him more thoroughly than the battle with the dragon. His blood pulsed with strange energies, the dual magics of dragonkind and vampire warring within his veins. His quarters were surprisingly lavish, a spacious circular room with walls covered in tapestries, a massive four-poster bed draped in crimson velvet, and tall windows covered with heavy curtains to block the coming daylight. A fire burned in a hearth of black marble, casting dancing shadows across the stone floor. The queen rarely grants outsiders such accommodations, remarked his escort, a pale-faced thrall whose vacant eyes suggested years of blood servitude. You have made an impression. There was neither envy nor admiration in his voice, only the flat observation of one whose emotions had long since been extinguished. Left alone, Benio approached the window, drawing back the heavy drapes. The eastern sky had begun to lighten, the stars fading as dawn approached. Below, the castle grounds stretched out in eerie silence, gardens of night, blooming flowers, fountains flowing with water so dark it might have been blood, and beyond that the village that supported the vampire court. He could perceive movement there, humans preparing for their day while their immortal masters retreated to their coffins and crypts, an ecosystem of predator and prey existing in uneasy equilibrium. Yet he sensed that beyond the relative safety of the castle's shadow, the outer villages lived in constant terror, never knowing when the queen's hunters might descend upon them. Exhaustion finally overcame him. He removed Promesa from its sheath, placing the sword beside the bed within easy reach, and collapsed onto the mattress as sleep claimed him. His last thought was of Cassia's face when she had tasted his blood, the moment when her careful facade had slipped, revealing something vulnerable beneath. Dreams came swiftly, but they were not his own. The dragon's blood had altered his sleeping mind just as it had transformed his waking body. He found himself drifting through memories that belonged to Valak, soaring above primordial forests, breathing fire that could melt stone, hoarding treasures in mountain lairs. Ancient hatreds and ancient hungers filled his dreaming consciousness. Then the dream shifted, darkened. He was running through moonlit forests, heart pounding with fear and exhilaration, blood on his lips warm and coppery, centuries compressed into moments. Castle walls rising around him, a crown of thorns and silver placed upon his brow, an eternity of night stretching before him. Cassia's memories gleaned from their blood exchange, tangled with his own. He woke with a gasp as the sun reached its zenith, though no light penetrated the heavy curtains. For a moment he was disoriented, uncertain where the dragon ended, where the vampire began, and what remained of the blacksmith's son from Thornwall. His shadow stretched across the floor, too long, too dark, moving independently of his own body. The dragon's curse was growing stronger. A knock at the door interrupted his troubled thoughts. Enter, he called, reaching for Promesa. The door opened to reveal a young woman, fully human judging by the healthy flush of her skin. She carried a tray of food and a pitcher of water. The queen instructed that you be fed, she said, setting down her burden on a small table. Unlike the thrall who had escorted him, her eyes were clear and alert. I'm Alara, I serve in the daylight hours. You're not afraid? Benio asked, noting how she glanced curiously at his golden flecked eyes, the shadow that coiled at his feet. She smiled faintly. I was born in this castle's shadow. Fear is as natural as breathing here. She poured water into a silver goblet. But you're something new, the dragon slayer who made the queen retreat to her chambers before dawn. Is that unusual? She rarely rests even in daylight. Alara's voice dropped to a whisper. Some say she hasn't truly slept in centuries, that her mind never finds peace. Benio thought of the fragments of memory he had glimpsed during their blood exchange, the weight of immortality, the endless vigilance required to maintain her power. That seems a terrible fate. All fates are terrible in the queen's domain, Alara replied matter-of-factly, but yours need not be. There are ways out of the castle that even her guards don't know, passages built when this fortress was still human rule. She met his gaze directly. You could be gone before sunset. You would help me escape. She shrugged. I help those who need it, but her eyes narrowed slightly. I don't think you want escape. Before Benio could respond, a new voice spoke from the shadows of the room. How perceptive, little daylight servant. Lazarus stepped into view, seemingly having materialized from the darkest corner of the chamber. Ilara stiffened, dropping immediately into a deep curtsy. "Leave us," the vampire commanded. The girl retreated without another word, though she cast one final meaningful glance at Benio before closing the door behind her. "Making friends already?" Lazarus drawled, examining the room with casual interest. "Dangerous in a place where friendship is merely another form of transaction." Benio rose from the bed, noting that despite the full daylight outside, the vampire moved with ease. "I thought your kind couldn't tolerate the sun." "The oldest of us learn tricks," Lazarus replied with a thin smile. "Ways to endure what should obliterate us. The queen of course has mastered this art entirely. She walks in sunlight when she must, though it causes her great pain." He picked up an apple from the tray, studying it without interest before setting it down again. "But I didn't come to discuss vampire weaknesses." "Why did you come then?" "To warn you." Lazarus's expression grew serious. "The court is in turmoil. News of your exchange with the queen has spread already. Factions are forming. Some see you as an opportunity, others as a threat." "Factions?" Benio frowned. "I thought Cassia's rule was absolute." Lazarus laughed softly. "No power is absolute, Dragon Slayer. Even immortals can be destroyed. The queen has enemies both within her court and beyond its walls." He moved to the window, peering through a small gap in the curtains. "For centuries she has ruled through a careful balance of fear, reward and tradition. Your presence disrupts that balance because of my claim to her." "Because she did not immediately reject it." Lazarus turned back to face him. "Had she killed you or imprisoned you or even turned you into one of her mindless thralls, the court would have understood power asserting itself over presumption. But she fed from you an intimate act and then granted you honored guest quarters rather than a dungeon cell." He shook his head, genuine puzzlement in his ancient eyes. "In 700 years I have never witnessed her respond this way to any hopeful suitor, mortal or immortal. You have become a destabilizing factor." Benio absorbed this information without reaction. The blood exchange had revealed to him glimpses of Cassia's profound loneliness, the barriers she had erected around herself over centuries, that she had permitted even that fleeting moment of vulnerability was extremely meaningful. "There is further news," Lazarus continued. "The Council of Crimson Elders is scheduled to convene tonight. The 7 most ancient vampires in the Queen's court, her advisors and occasionally her restraints. They possess the ability to override her decisions, not directly, but their combined power nearly equals her own. Should all 7 oppose her," he let the unspoken threat linger, "they will demand to evaluate you, to comprehend your nature and the potential danger you represent." "I pose no risk to Cassia." Lazarus's face adopted a look of pity. "Everyone poses a risk to someone in her position. Authority invites defiance. Immortality fosters jealousy. Beauty provokes ownership." He moved closer, his voice dropping. "In love or its resemblance encourages treachery. I would never betray her, perhaps not intentionally." Lazarus gestured toward Benio's shadow, which had aggressively stretched towards him. "But the dragon's curse strengthens with every passing day. Soon it will demand recompense for the power it has bestowed upon you. I have felt it, the creeping darkness, the alien cravings. I can manage it for now," Lazarus conceded. "But what of 12 months from now, a decade?" "The queen operates on a timescale of centuries, Dragon Slayer. Even if she harbored some affection for you, she would never jeopardize her reign for a mortal whose lifespan is a mere flicker to her. The dragon's blood extends life," Benio argued. "I could have many centuries ahead." "Extended life is not immortality," Lazarus countered, "and the price of those extended years would be your humanity, the very quality that seems to intrigue her." He moved toward the entrance, pausing with his hand on the latch. "Contemplate carefully what you truly desire here, the queen's affection, her sovereignty, or something else entirely." With that ambiguous statement he departed, leaving Benio alone with his thoughts and his restless shadow. The day progressed slowly. Benio ate very little, discovering that food no longer satisfied his craving. Instead he paced the chamber, studying the tapestries which depicted ancient conflicts between vampires and other supernatural beings, werewolves with foaming jaws, fey creatures with vicious beauty, and dragons whose scales shimmered with malevolence. One image particularly seized his attention, a woman with red hair standing amidst a field of fallen fighters, a crown of thorns and silver upon her head. Cassia in her younger years. The woven scene captured both her stunning appearance and the terrifying might she wielded. Her expression was one of victory tainted by isolation. As the sun began to set, Benio felt an odd connection within him, an awareness of the sun's descent, as though his body had become synchronized with the rhythms of night and day in novel ways. The dragon's blood fortified him in daylight. The vampire's essence he had absorbed during their exchange drew him toward the approaching darkness. Another knock sounded at his door just as the final rays of sun vanished behind the western mountains. This time it was Lilith, the vampire captain he had met at the entrance. "The queen requires your presence," she stated without preamble. Her expression was meticulously neutral, but Benio sensed the tension coiled within her. "The Crimson Council awaits." Benio retrieved Promesa, securing the sword at his hip despite Lilith's disapproving look. "I do not go anywhere without it," he informed her, meeting her gaze steadily. "Very well," she replied icily, "but be aware that drawing it in the council's presence will be interpreted as an act of aggression." She guided him down the spiral tower staircase and through a maze of passages deeper into the castle's core than he had ventured previously. The corridors felt older, the architecture transitioning from Gothic to something more ancient, and elemental torches burned with an unnatural blue light, casting more shadows than illumination. Finally they reached a massive doorway of blackened wood reinforced with silver. Mysterious symbols had been carved into its surface, glowing faintly with an inner radiance. 2 vampire guards stood at attention, their armor more elaborate than those Benio had seen before, ceremonial guardians of whatever lay beyond the dragon slayer. As requested, Lilith announced. The guards stepped aside and the huge door swung open silently on well-oiled hinges. Remember, Lilith murmured as Benio walked past her, they are older than kingdoms, cunning as serpents, speak only when addressed, and shield your mind. Some possess powers that can extract the truth from your thoughts like ripe fruit. With those reassuring words she ushered him into the chamber beyond, a perfect circle of black volcanic glass illuminated by 7 tall candles made of black wax. In the center stood a single chair, simple and unadorned. Surrounding it, arranged in a larger ring, were 7 elaborate thrones, each occupied by a figure more formidable than the last, and upon an 8th throne, positioned slightly higher than the others, sat Cassia herself. In this environment, surrounded by the most ancient of her kind, she appeared both majestic and perilous, a predator among predators. Her crimson gown seemed to absorb the candlelight, and upon her brow sat a delicate crown of silver thorns. Her eyes met Benio's across the chamber, her expression revealing nothing. Yet in that brief moment he again felt the bond that had formed during their blood exchange, a fragile connection spanning centuries of isolation. Benio of Thornwall, she declared, her voice carrying effortlessly in the chamber's perfect acoustics, you stand before the Crimson Council, the eldest and wisest of my court. They wish to understand your nature and what you seek within my domain. She gestured to the lone chair. Be seated and answer truthfully. Deception will be received poorly. As Benio approached the chair, he felt the scrutiny of 14 ancient inhuman eyes following his every movement. The Crimson Council had awakened, and the Dragon Slayer's trial had commenced. The obsidian chamber vibrated with ancient power as Benio sat in the solitary chair. The 7 members of the Crimson Council examined him with predatory intensity, their ageless faces revealing nothing of their inner thoughts. I am Vladimir, first of the council, intoned a vampire whose pale features seemed sculpted from marble, his accent bearing traces of lands long forgotten by human histories. We would know what manner of creature sits before us, neither fully human nor truly immortal. Benio met the ancient vampire's gaze steadily. I am Benio of Thornwall, a blacksmith who slew the dragon Valix and carries the repercussions of its blood. The repercussions, whispered a female counselor whose skin was so transparent that Benio could see the network of veins beneath, long dry of human blood. The dragon's essence transforms you. Even now I can observe the shadow growing within. She leaned forward, her movements fluid as water. I am Seraphina, seer of the night. Your future forks like lightning. One trajectory leads to greatness, the other to monstrousness. Both paths pose a danger to our kind, rumbled a massive vampire with Moorish features, golden rings decorating his fingers. Ibrahim speaks truth. The dragon cursed have walked among us before. They burn brightly but briefly, leaving devastation in their wake. The last who bore such a curse nearly ruined the eastern courts 3 centuries ago, added a 4th counselor whose Asian features were delicate, yet her eyes hard as black quartz. We cannot risk such turmoil again. Throughout these exchanges Queen Cassia remained silent, her expression unreadable, but Benio, attuned to her now through their blood exchange, sensed the tension beneath her calm demeanor. You assert affection for our queen, stated a vampire with flame-red hair similar to Cassia's own, perhaps a distant relative from her mortal days. Yet love is ephemeral while our kind endures. What assurance have we that your devotion will not sour into resentment as you watch yourself age while she remains perpetually youthful? Before Benio could respond, the 6th counselor spoke, a being so archaic that his features had begun to shift from human to something else entirely. His fingers elongated into claws, his eyes entirely black. The dragon's blood extends life, he said, his voice like stones grinding together. Perhaps centuries, but it also corrupts. The shadow will eventually consume him as it does all who bear the curse. The only uncertainty is whether he will threaten our queen. Before that happens I would never harm her, Benio stated firmly. The 7th and final counselor laughed, a sound like shattering glass. She appeared the youngest of all, with the face of a girl no more than 16, though her eyes held millennia of cruelty. You say that now, Dragon Slayer, but when the curse reaches its peak, when the shadow self devours your humanity, what then? Even now your own darkness reaches toward our queen, craving her power. Benio glanced down, alarmed to see his shadow stretching across the obsidian floor, reaching toward Cassia's throne like grasping hands. With effort he pulled it back, forcing the darkness to coil once more around his feet. The boy has some measure of control, at least, Vladimir observed, but for how long? That is what concerns us. Queen Cassia raised a hand, silencing further commentary from the council. For the first time since the audience began she spoke. These worries are valid, but they assume that I cannot defend myself against one dragon-cursed mortal. Her voice carried a subtle edge of annoyance. I who have reigned over these lands for 7 centuries, I who have decimated armies of both mortal and supernatural enemies, With respect, your majesty, Seraphina responded. It is not merely your physical safety that troubles us. Your interest in this mortal suggests an emotional susceptibility we have not witnessed before. Such attachments cloud judgment even for one as mighty as yourself. A coldness spread through the chamber as Cassia's expression darkened. You question my judgment, Cirrus. I observe patterns across the fabric of time, Seraphina replied carefully, and I perceive danger in this new thread you weave. Tension crackled in the air between the queen and her counselors. Benio realized he was witnessing a power struggle, centuries in the making, the eternal conflict between a sovereign's authority and the constraints her advisors sought to impose. Perhaps Ibrahim suggested, breaking the perilous silence, there is a middle ground to be found, a test for the dragon slayer to prove both his command over the curse and his devotion to our Queen Cassia's eyes narrowed slightly. What test do you propose? The Rite of Seven Knights, Ibrahim said, causing murmurs among the other counselors. An ancient custom not invoked for over 3 centuries. Vladimir nodded slowly. A fitting challenge, 7 knights to prove himself worthy or to expose his true nature. And if I successfully complete this test, Benio asked, then the council will not oppose your presence in the queen's court. Vladimir answered, though what role you might hold there remains her majesty's decision alone. Cassia studied Benio for a long moment, her crimson eyes revealing nothing of her thoughts. The Rite of Seven Knights necessitates blood sacrifice, she said finally. The dragon cursed would need to survive 7 feedings, 1 from each counselor, without succumbing to the darkness within him. Vampire blood is potent, Seraphina added, and volatile. When combined with dragon's essence, many would be driven to insanity by such a mixture. Benio understood then this was not merely a test but potentially a sentence of death. 7 ancient vampires, each feeding from him, each injecting him with their toxic immortality while drawing out his dragon-tainted blood. The strain on body and mind would be immense, yet he had not traveled this far to retreat. I accept the challenge, he said firmly. A subtle smile curved Cassia's perfect lips, the first emotion she had displayed during the entire proceeding. Then it is decided. The rite commences tomorrow at midnight and concludes on the 7th night with my feeding. Should the supplicant survive that long, the council session ended shortly thereafter, each ancient vampire departing with varying expressions of satisfaction or concern. Only Cassia remained, descending from her elevated throne to stand before Benio. You readily accept challenges, blacksmith, she observed when they were alone. First a dragon, now my counsel. One might question your instinct for self-preservation or my determination, he countered. Something softened in her gaze. The rite is no mere formality. Each night will draw you closer to the verge of madness. The dragon's curse will battle against the vampire essence, tearing you apart from within. Yet you did not object to it because you must be tested, she replied simply. Not for them, for me. She reached out her cool fingers, brushing his cheek in a gesture almost tender. What I glimpsed in your blood, the purity of your devotion, it disturbs me, tempts me, makes me recall things long buried. Is that so terrible for one such as I? Perhaps. She withdrew her hand. Immortality is maintained through consistency, through the rejection of change and feeling. These are luxuries I relinquished centuries ago, or locked away, Benio suggested, waiting for someone worthy of them. A shadow of vulnerability crossed her perfect features. You utter dangerous words, dragon slayer. She turned away, her crimson gown rustling against the obsidian floor. Rest while you can. Tomorrow the trial begins in earnest. The Rite of Seven Knights proved every bit as grueling as promised. Each midnight Benio was escorted to a different sacred chamber within the castle where one of the counselors awaited. Vladimir, first of the council, initiated the ritual, his ancient fangs piercing Benio's throat with expert precision. The vampire's blood, when it flowed into Benio's veins in exchange, burned like liquid ice, carrying memories of battles fought before the establishment of Rome. Each night brought new agony, new visions, new threats to his sanity. Seraphina's blood showed him potential futures, some glorious, others horrifying, all dependent on choices not yet made. Ibrahim's essence carried the weight of empires risen and fallen, the taste of desert sands and magic older than written language. The Asian counselor Ming flooded him with perfect discipline and calculating patience learned across millennia. The flame-haired Ellis, a distant kin to Cassia herself, shared blood that resonated with hers, a foretaste of what awaited if Benio survived. The Ancient One, called only the Hollow, his humanity long since stripped away by time, nearly broke Benio with the emptiness his blood carried, the yawning void that immortality eventually became. And the child faced Lilith, youngest yet perhaps cruelest of the 7, whose blood burned with betrayals and vengeance accumulated across thousands of years. Throughout it all, Benio's shadow grew more restless, more independent, sometimes lashing out at the counselors, sometimes coiling protectively around him. The dragon's curse fought against the vampire essence invading his system, the 2 ancient magics warring for dominance of his transforming body. Each dawn he would collapse in his chambers, fevered and delirious, his veins tracing black patterns beneath his skin. Ilara, the human servant, tended to him during these hours, applying poultices to wounds that healed too quickly and yet not completely, leaving new scars to join those from his battle with Valix. No one has survived past the 5th night before, she told him as she bathed his forehead after Lilith's feeding, yet you endure. The castle whispers of it. Some say the queen watches over you herself during the daylight hours, though none have seen her do so. Benio, drifting between consciousness and delirium, was never certain if Cassia truly came to him while he slept, yet sometimes he would wake with the scent of ancient roses in the air, or find the iron rose placed on the pillow beside him, though he had left it on the table across the room. The 7th night arrived, and with it the final and most dangerous feeding. Weakened by the previous trials, his body a battleground of conflicting magics, Benio was escorted not to a ritual chamber but to the queen's private apartments, a suite of rooms at the highest point of the castle's central tower. There Cassia awaited him, dressed not in her usual formal attire but in a simple gown of white silk that contrasted sharply with her flame-red hair. The chamber was lit only by candles, their light reflecting off mirrors positioned to create the illusion of stars surrounding them. You have endured, she said softly as the guards withdrew, leaving them alone, more than any mortal should have been able to withstand. Benio stood before her, swaying slightly from exhaustion yet refusing to show weakness. I made a promise, he replied simply. Yes, your promise. She moved closer, studying the changes the rite had wrought in him. His eyes now permanently gleamed with the golden fire of dragonkind. His skin bore the tracery of black veins like an arcane tattoo, and his shadow had become a semi-solid entity that curled around his feet like a loyal hound. You are neither what you were nor what the counselors feared you might become. You have found balance through sheer obstinacy. Perhaps a smile touched her lips, a quality I have come to appreciate. She gestured to a reclining couch draped in crimson velvet. The final feeding is different from the others, more intimate, more perilous. It requires consent freely given. Benio understood. The previous feedings had been clinical, ritualistic. This would be something else entirely, the true sharing of essence between them. You have my consent, he said, seating himself on the couch. You have had it since I was 5 years old, standing by that roadside with an iron rose. Cassia's expression softened with something like amazement. Such devotion, she murmured, sitting beside him. Even now, knowing what I am, what I have done across the centuries, still you offer yourself willingly. I have seen into your heart, he reminded her. Through your blood I glimpsed the woman beneath the queen, the loneliness, the burden of eternity. I do not love you despite what you are, Cassia, I love you because of it. For a moment she seemed almost human in her vulnerability, then with gentle grace she leaned forward, her lips brushing his throat. This will bond us, she whispered against his skin, more completely than you can imagine. Are you certain? In answer, Benio tilted his head, offering himself to her. Her fangs pierced his flesh with exquisite precision, and the world dissolved into crimson light. This exchange was deeper than before, a complete fusion of consciousness. He felt her ancient power flowing into him even as his dragon-enhanced blood filled her. Centuries of memories cascaded through his mind, her joys, her sorrows, her triumphs and regrets. He experienced her transformation from mortal to immortal, the slow calcification of her heart as she walled off her humanity to survive the endless march of time, and in return she experienced his determination, his single-minded devotion, the purity of love that had driven him from childhood to this moment. Through his eyes she saw herself not as the monster she had become but as the queen she could be, powerful, yet compassionate, eternal, yet connected to the world around her. When she finally withdrew, both of them were transformed. The black veins beneath Benio's skin had receded, replaced by a subtle luminescence that pulsed with his heartbeat. His shadow had settled, still separate but no longer restless, and Cassia's cheeks bore the faintest flush of color, as though some of his humanity had awakened what lay dormant within her. The council will be satisfied, she said after a long silence. The dragon's curse has been balanced by vampire essence. You will neither succumb to darkness nor wither with mortality. She touched his face with newfound tenderness. Centuries stretch before you now, not immortality but a lifespan to match my own for all practical purposes. And us? Benio asked. What becomes of the blacksmith's son and his queen? Cassia's crimson eyes held a warmth he had never seen before. That, she said softly, depends on whether you still wish to fulfill that childhood promise. From within the folds of her gown she produced the iron rose, now transformed. Where once it had been crude iron, it now gleamed with a silvery light, its petals delicately articulated, a small ruby at its center pulsing like a heartbeat. Our shared blood, she explained. It changed the rose just as it changed us both. She placed it in his palm, closing his fingers around it, a fitting symbol for what you offer and what I am at last ready to accept. Benio felt the weight of history shifting around them, ancient magics realigning to accommodate something new in the world, a vampire queen who had rediscovered her heart, and a dragon-blessed mortal who had kept a child's promise against impossible odds. When I grow up, he quoted softly, I'll be your husband. I no longer laugh at such notions, Cassia replied, drawing him close, though it seems I needed 20 years and the blood of a dragon to recognize what stood before me, a love pure enough to outlast eternity. As their lips met, sealing a bond centuries in the making, the castle itself seemed to sigh around them. In the village below, flowers bloomed out of season, their petals the same deep crimson as the queen's hair, and far above, where stars wheeled in their ancient courses, fates were rewritten for a blacksmith who had dared to love a vampire, and a queen who had finally remembered how to love in return. Beyond the window, dawn approached the first of countless they would witness together, neither fully mortal nor truly immortal, but perfectly improbably balanced between worlds that had never before found harmony. The iron rose nestled between their joined hands pulsed with a light that was neither dragon fire nor vampire magic, but something entirely new, something that against all odds might just last forever.